Alright, what's going on, guys? For the longest time, I was what I would consider a Souls elitist, and what I believe constituted that was that I was avidly against, on a first playthrough, using things like magic and summons, because I believed they made the game way too easy and that whoever did that would miss out on the intended experience of the games. And to a point, I still hold that belief, at least for the past Dark Souls games, because you can't deny co-op in the past games definitely made the game a lot easier than it should have been. Magic, on the other hand, has been kinda arguable in the past, and it's followed a trend in those games that the beginning with a magic build has been very painful as you go on the journey to find better and optimal spells, but by the end of the game you're kinda just blasting your way through everything, and sniping the bosses before they even get a chance to attack you. Now I do to a point still hold those beliefs for Dark Souls. However, Elden Ring is a different story. Elden Ring has really challenged those beliefs for me. And I kinda got this feeling back in the network test, and I talked about it a little bit. Some of you guys may remember my points on that. But I had an epiphany a few days ago, once I reached about the 90% mark through the game, that really opened my eyes to a point that this game was not made for my playstyle. You see, in the past games, I've always been an avid proponent of strength builds. I want nothing more in a Souls game to run around with a giant sword, do as much damage per hit as humanly possible, and get absolutely no help whatsoever. And this is the approach I've been taking in Elden Ring. Now I'm gonna talk about this without spoilers, so you don't have to worry. But once you reach the Erd Tree, there becomes a trend with the main bosses, where they have combos of attacks that almost never cease. And after every attack, they jump out of range. Now some of you may know the boss I'm talking about in question. It's a required boss at the very late game. But I kid you not, with my ultra great swords, I was doing plenty of damage, but I physically could not hit the boss unless I directly poised through an attack. And I'm not exaggerating. The time between his attacks and when he would jump out of range was simply faster than I could swing my sword. And it was at that moment I realized that I, with my elitist beliefs, was actually the one missing out on the intended experience. Because like I mentioned, when I played the network test of this game, things like magic and spirit summons did feel kind of overpowered. And I kinda had an inkling in the back of my head that the game was encouraging this playstyle of incorporating magic and spirits into every build. Now I know Kitao mentioned that they were going to be nerfing magic after the network test, but as you can clearly see, it's even more potent now. So the question that's been circulating around a lot in Discourse is that, are magic and spirit summons the easy mode of the game? And honestly, while I think they are, I think it's supposed to be that way. With a flurry of new Ashes of War that incorporate magic, and a ton of strength and dex weapons that have a base faith or intelligence requirement, and every major encounter allowing the incorporation of spirit summons, it's obvious that the game is intending you to go in this direction. If you've been watching a lot of playthroughs on YouTube of other people playing through the game, you might have noticed a trend, that the majority of them are going one of two routes. New players to these games that aren't heavy Souls players, at least from what I've noticed, tend to be leaning towards magic or dex bleed. Now I haven't seen a lot of data on dex, so I'm not going to talk about that here. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I've seen almost no one going for a pure melee strength build. This is the one I went for, and I constantly felt like throughout the game that I was the one missing out. I became stuck on bosses that I saw everyone else flying through with their high damage ranged magic and spirit summons, and I really felt like I was doing something wrong, like I didn't understand a core component of this game. Now I'm not going to go so far as to say the game is impossible with a strength build, it's clearly not. But the argument that I've seen going around that's kind of opened my eyes a little bit is that perhaps we're just imposing a challenge on ourselves by not taking advantage of the magic and the spirit summons. And so after I saw a few people saying that, while I was stuck on the boss that I was talking about earlier that's very late in the game and I won't show footage of, I decided to cave and try out the magic and the spirit summons, because I genuinely felt like I was never going to overcome this challenge unless I tried something different. And when I tried the boss the next time with a mimic tier summon and with a few ranged spells and buffs, I noticed something. The boss began to fight me differently. He would go and attack my spirit summon and then fake out an attack and switch it up to catch me off guard when I thought he was aggroed on the spirit. And he'd start using AoEs when I wasn't even near him because it knew I would rush in. And while it had these new changes, all of a sudden the fight felt natural. I suddenly felt like I was getting the intended experience. Now obviously I wasn't running around with a one-shot build that you see all over YouTube. I'm pretty sure they're gonna end up patching that. Clearly that's not what I'm talking about, but it's responses like this that say, if you have to use a spirit summon to beat the boss, did you really beat it? That perhaps I would have been inclined to say, at the beginning of my journey, that suddenly seemed really stupid. By no means did the fight suddenly feel easy. I mean, after I started using Mimic Tier, it still took me like 15 tries to kill it. But it made the difference between the fight seeming virtually impossible and feeling natural, because as we can see, the AI is incorporating a mindset that changes if you're using spirit summons or not. Clearly, this is an intended part of the game that you should not feel guilty for utilizing. Now, there are a few things about magic and spells in particular that I think are reasonable and should be considered. First of all, I do find it a little bit strange that a lot of these spells can put out the same amount of damage as a heavy attack with a colossal sword from out of the boss's range and in less time. I know of several spells that put out that much damage with the respective scaling. And while we're on the topic of scaling, take a look at this. If you understand how scaling works in these games, basically what it is that for every stat point you level up, you get a damage boost in your weapon that utilizes that specific attribute. However, at a point there's something called a soft cap, where the bonus you get per level becomes negligible. For strength, that number is 60, but it's been discovered that for intelligence, the number is 80. So essentially, you can level up intelligence as much as you want, without ever losing that additional bonus. While the melee builds lose it at level 60, they miss out on 20 levels of bonus that a magic build gets to utilize. Now, of course, you're probably not going to have 80 intelligence in your build, but with the recommended level for the end game being around 150, it's not totally unheard of. So it's things like that that kind of make me question why that's even possible, but definitely reinforce the fact that magic, at least in some capacity, is an easy mode. However, I think to approach it with the elitist mindset of not using it at all, and diminishing the credit of those that do, you become the one that's missing out. You become the one that's not getting the intended experience, while they're relishing the game to its full capacity. So my stance on this has definitely completely changed, and I think a lot of our mindsets need to change from the past Souls games, because Elden Ring is not the same. The game clearly intends for you to use these things, and perhaps by not, we're just imposing a challenge on ourselves that we don't have to. Anyways though guys, that's gonna pretty much do it for the video. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know down below, do you think magic and spirit summons are the easy mode of the game? Or do you think that, yeah, while they might be a little bit overpowered, that's their intended purpose? But if you did enjoy the video, please leave a like on it and subscribe if you're new around here, and I'll catch you in the next one.